On today's episode of the Locked On NBA Draft with No Ceilings podcast, Maxwell Baumbach and I are going to break down and discuss a D2 to D1 wing transfer in Elyjah Freeman, headed to Auburn this year. We're going to break down why he might be a deep wing sleeper for the 2026 NBA Draft.
You are Locked On NBA Draft with No Ceilings, your daily podcast on the future stars of the NBA, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thank you for making Locked On NBA Draft with No Ceilings your first listen of the day. I'm your host, Nathan Grubel, current No Ceilings contributor, scouting consultant, evaluator of prospects for the last 14 years. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network and are available wherever you get your podcasts, as well as on YouTube. Make sure to subscribe, rate, and review. This episode is brought to you by Monarch Money. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNBA at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. Joining me this week is my co-host, curator, creator, lead columnist of the No Stone Unturned series for No Ceilings is Maxwell Baumbach. Maxwell, how are we doing today?
I'm doing great. I'm fired up. Every year I do this series looking for the best deep cut sleepers out there. That might be Elyjah Freeman this year. I won't say he's the best player I've ever covered for this series. I will say I think he's the most interesting.
I mean, we're talking deep cuts today, as Maxwell referenced on today's episode. We're going to break down Elyjah Freeman. He's a 6'8" wing who's transferring this season from D2 Lincoln Memorial to Auburn, in arguably college basketball's toughest conference in the SEC. We're going to tell you about his game. We're going to discuss what his transition from D2 could look like, as well as just touch on scouting prospects at the D2 level in general. Maxwell has some great insights there. And then finally, we're going to hit on Eric Dailey Jr. and a few other sleeper wings that Maxwell covered this week for his No Stone Unturned series over at NoCeilingsNBA.com. If you haven't checked out his latest column or any of the other editions he's done this year for No Stone Unturned, as well as prior year's editions, please go to NoCeilingsNBA.com. Check that out as he goes in depth on every prospect we're discussing on this episode and more. Before we get started, doing a quickly shout out our other co-hosts on the feed, both Tyler Rucker and Tyler Metcalf just released an episode covering the top guard prospects in the 2026 NBA draft class. Spoiler alert, this is one of the best guard classes that I've scouted preseason in years. So make sure to go listen and watch that episode. And then Corey and Albert took a look at one of my favorite incoming freshmen, Tunde Yusufu, a wing who will be playing at Baylor, and why he has a top 5 case on preseason boards. So again, you can catch both of those episodes wherever you get your podcasts. All right, Maxwell. Elyjah Freeman, 6'8" sophomore wing prospect. Like I said, he played at the D2 level at Lincoln Memorial during his freshman season. He was a former McDonald's All-American nominee, which I thought was fascinating. Late bloomer prospect, started 25 games last year, 19.3 points per game, 9.1 rebounds, 2.4 assists, 57.8% from the field, 46% from three, and 80% from the line. That is efficiency at its finest, 2.5 stocks per game and 2.6 turnovers. Maxwell, why don't you go ahead and start breaking down his game, particularly his offense for the audience? Why don't you tell us a little bit about Elyjah Freeman?
Yeah, I think context is so key here. So we're talking about a guy who was 5'8" when he entered 8th grade and really blossomed his senior year in high school. And with how the portal works now, a lot of times these high school kids, if they're not committed before their senior year, teams just aren't really looking at him. Ends up at Lincoln Memorial, which is a phenomenal Division II program, but it is a Division II program. What makes him so interesting on the offensive end is there is a very interesting amalgamation of athleticism and skill that's present here. So first off, he can get out and run the floor. He is a blur in transition, and he is a sky-high leaper off of 1 foot. He had 50 dunks last season, which I know, hey, D2 might be a little bit easier to dominate the competition. 50 dunks would be a good number for a center. And we're talking about a perimeter-oriented guy who dunked 50 times last year. I don't care what level you're playing at. That raises my eye. The other thing is there's like half-court translatability to how he does it. He's really good attacking off the second side, has a really strong first step when run off the line. But he also had a lot of plays where he just straight up breaks a guy down off the dribble. Will cook a guy in isolation, has some nice snatchback dribbles, some crossovers. He's able to really dice through the lane. He has these slick Euro combinations that he's able to use. So he can sort of self-create in the half court as well. And when he does that, he's good at the rim. He made 65% of his half court rim attempts. He drew a ton of fouls, had a near 0.6 free throw rate. And there's some really interesting touch there on those free throws. He made over 80% of them. The volume from three was low, but he made 45.6% of them. It's a little bit raw. There's times where he's a little bit clunky. The handle gets a little wide. I have some concerns about the base on the jump shot. He passes up a lot of open threes. But I think when you look at what he is good at, he is good in a very rare way. You don't see a lot of 6'8" guys who can put it on the floor or match his run jump athleticism. But really, it's that like shiftiness, that tight window game that makes him particularly interesting to me.
So that's the thing about Freeman, and he rated out in the 97th percentile in terms of total offense per synergy. Again, that's across the D2 level. And when you're evaluating a prospect at a lower level, you do want to see them in the top 5 percentile in a lot of the major categories you would want to see. That includes shooting. That primarily includes a lot of defensive types of things. You want to see him be a good assist to turnover type of guy and really focus on his decision making. There's a lot to like about Freeman. I think the biggest thing for me that you did cover was just how well he can translate and scale up off the ball. He knows where he needs to be. He really knows how to attack and get the spaces and certainly convert on easy finishes, on open spot up shots. The transition stuff was really interesting in terms of his decision making. He's very aware of how many defenders are coming back with him in transition. Does he need to fill the lane? Does he get out to the corners? And then those off-ball types of things in the half court, like when to lift up from the corner, when to cut to the basket, when to come off of another action, and which way does he need to go to catch the ball and put himself in position to finish, not necessarily put himself in a position where he can't make that immediate next play. So there's a lot of things that Freeman can do off the ball. We're going to get into some concerns that we have for sure in the second segment, but I do also want to touch on some of his defensive stuff, really in the positive section. Maxwell, I thought he was a really good decision maker, both on and off the ball defensively. I know that there's a few things that we can get to as far as negatives that might be an immediate concern in the short term at the next level. But I do think when you talk about his athleticism, right, that sort of pop that he has, his ability to get to spaces very quickly, so he can cover a lot of ground. He can use his hands very well to poke the ball away for steal opportunities in the break. Like, he's one of those quick reflexes guys. So there may be a few concerns that we'll get to, but I think there are a lot of positives for him defensively as well, despite, he's one of these guys, he's 6'8", he's a lanky frame, but I do think there's a lot of plays where he doesn't necessarily let that lack of strength bother him to an extent. I think he does make some good plays on the ball and can play both on and off the ball defensively.
Yeah, I totally agree. Off ball, he's got the speed to sort of play that ball hawk game. In passing lanes, he had some huge blocks around the basket. His motor runs really hot, which is something I really appreciated with him, is when you are the star offensive player on a team. And he had Wes Ennis, who's going to be at South Florida, who's really good too, on his team. But he didn't let his usage burden be an excuse. He ran back hard in transition defense and had some of his best blocks in transition, which I always like. I just like to see that level of hustle and effort. The point of attack stuff I thought was way better if you watch the late season tape. If you watch him early in the year, it's kind of a mess. We'll talk about that in segment 2. But I thought as the year went on, he made a real concerted effort to like sit down in his chair more consistently. And when he does get beat, he can get back into the play better than just about anybody because he is so fast, so long. Every movement is so dramatic. Every stride is long. Every jump he gets high off the floor. So he has excellent recovery tools, but I agree with you. I think there's real dynamism both on and off the ball for him defensively.
100%. So when you put that on and off ball versatility defensively together, when you match that with the athleticism at 6'8" with length, you see a lot of positive shooting indicators for him. He can finish well in transition, knows where to be and how to play off the ball. You put together a lot of those positives and you come up with a similar case in terms of where we're at right now with someone like a Tyrone Riley and maybe where he was last year, which is you can see a lot of those things potentially coming together on film. He's going to another level. There's going to be an adjustment period, but I feel like a coach is going to like him a lot in practices. They're going to like his work ethic, this motor that you referenced, and they're going to see a player who has a lot of upside to complement somebody else. And that's how you need to get on the floor at another level. And eventually when he does get into some NBA draft conversations, maybe he pops next year. Maybe that becomes a real potential thing for him, depending on how Auburn's roster shakes out. But when he gets into those conversations, a lot of those complementary skills that we're talking about, not necessarily some of the on-ball stuff, will be what scouts are going to point to first and say, can he do this? Can he do that? And so far, up to this point in his career, I think he's done a great job at answering a lot of those questions. So there's a very positive case for him to be made as one of these deep wing sleepers in this upcoming 2026 NBA draft conversation. When we come back, we're going to take a quick break. We're going to break down some of Elyjah Freeman's improvement areas, what his transition from the D2 level is going to look like going up to D1, and gets Maxwell's thoughts on scouting D2 prospects in general. Stay tuned. Most people can't name all their financial accounts or even what they're worth. Whether it's 401ks, properties, or investments, when you don't have the time and the full picture, you can end up leaving some money on the table. And that's why there's Monarch Money. It's an all-in-one personal finance tool that brings your entire financial life together in one clean, easy-to-use interface on your laptop or your phone. Monarch does the heavy lifting for you. You can link all your accounts in minutes, see clear data visuals, get smart categorization of your spending, and finally feel in control of your money without ever touching a spreadsheet. I, for one, am trying to manage multiple long-term goals like paying off my car, making a dent in my mortgage, saving up for my wife and I's first dog, as well as a few other improvements around the house. And with Monarch Money, my wife and I can establish a budget and easily strategize around making sure our short-term bills are taken care of without sacrificing our long-term financial goals. Don't let financial opportunities slip through the cracks. Use code LOCKEDONNBA at monarchmoney.com in your browser for half off your first year. That's 50% off your first year at monarchmoney.com with code LOCKEDONNBA. Thank you for making Locked On NBA Draft with No Ceilings your first listen of the day. We have an important request. Locked On wants to hear from you. We've put together a survey to learn more about our listeners and make your favorite podcast even better. This is your chance to tell us what you like, what you don't, answer some questions about our advertising. Go to lockedonpodcast.com/survey to get started. Everyone who completes the survey will be entered for a chance to win one of 10 $100 Amazon gift cards. Again, that's lockedonpodcast.com/survey. You can also find the link in the show notes. Thank you in advance for helping us out. All right, Maxwell, Elyjah Freeman, D2 to D1 transition. It's an interesting path to take, but I do want to just start us off on a very positive note. There's reasons why guys like you and I want to look to lower levels, be it Division II, be it the JUCO ranks, to find talent who's coming into D1, whether it be low-level D1, the mid-majors, even some guys who are able to come right away into the high major level and play. Notable NBA players from the D2 ranks wanted to put together some few lists for you. Derek White of the Boston Celtics, Haywood Highsmith playing for the Brooklyn Nets. Some awesome guys from the past: Ben Wallace, George Gervin, Earl Pearl Monroe, Manu Bull, Charles Oakley, Phil Jackson. And I want to throw some JUCO guys in here as well, because it's a very similar conversation. Jimmy Butler, Chris Boucher, Rashawn Holmes, Jay Crowder, Dalton Connect, Jay Scrubb, Dennis Rodman, Bob McAdoo, Dennis Johnson, Markine. I mean, I can go on and on and on, Axel, about success stories that we've seen from lower levels, which is why I just think it's so important for us to maybe just take a few minutes before we get into some of Elyjah Freeman's improvement areas and transition. What is it like scouting D2 film, and what are some of the things that you look for in particular when you're looking at some of this film to determine who are maybe a guy or two who's ready to make that transition and really pop on a radar?
So a funny story is 2 years ago, I actually had someone tell me there's a D2 guy that you've got to watch for No Stone Unturned. And I watched him. I didn't think he was very good. And I didn't include him in the series, and it was Jalen Wells, and I felt really stupid. So the reason I really made a concerted effort this past year to dive in is because I don't want to miss that guy again. I don't want to miss out on a guy, and I wanted to develop a better understanding of like what was happening there that I missed and didn't understand. I think with Wells, maybe I should have indexed more on the late bloomer trajectory, whatever. But I think, well, like you said, it's important to consider because we've seen success stories in this level, but we're also going to see more of them. As the transfer portal becomes a bigger to-do, we're going to see more guys get a chance to step up when they're overperforming at these schools. And because schools are so oriented towards how did you produce in college, we're going to see a lot more talented freshmen seep down into these levels that are maybe a little bit too low for them out of the gate. And Elyjah Freeman's kind of a prime example of that, a guy who bloomed late and teams weren't looking to add a freshman, in the late spring. And then he ends up at Lincoln Memorial. So I think that's kind of the main reason for it. As far as the differences in what you're looking at on film, I think the biggest thing that you want is pure domination. I think of the guys who came from JUCO, D2, et cetera, last season, the guys who were best were Bennett Sturtz, who's going to be in this next draft, completely dominated on a cerebral level. And I think the same thing could be said of Jackson Monique too, who got a summer league look I believe maybe an Exhibit 10 after playing D2 and then transferring up to North Dakota State. What I want to see is just some area where you are so clearly a cut above everybody else. And I think it's really important to consider athleticism. The athleticism needs to look exceptional. I think that was where there's a player at Boise State this year, Javen Buchanan, who I covered last year for No Sun Unturned. And at the NAIA level, he looked like the best athlete on the floor by a mile. Like I thought he was like a Jalen Tyson tier athlete. And then you watch him this year at Boise State, and he kind of looked a step slow by Mountain West Conference standards. So it's really important to remember just how much lower the athleticism bar that you're watching is. And that's part of my intrigue with Freeman is we get hyper production at a young age. That's the other thing you consider too. A lot of these D2 standouts. And if you look at the D2 All-American list, it's a lot of seniors and a lot of juniors and grads. So when you get a freshman who's very clearly a cut above athletically, but is also producing across the board at a really high level, that's kind of what I'm looking for out of those kind of guys.
I think that was a great job analyzing what you're looking for at the D2 level. It leads me into, I have 3 concern areas with Freeman jumping up to D1. I'm going to get through them and then move out of the way so that you can let the audience know. Am I a little too concerned? Nate,
Sure.
Have you just not watched D2 film in a while? Like what's going on here? So 3 concerns. Number 1, you mentioned the dominance. That to me also very important. Like we talked about, you want to be in the top 5th percentile in terms of overall production at a lower level to be looked at as a guy who can go up. However, a lot of times when I was watching him on tape, he did look like a guy who was producing just because he had such superior physical advantages over someone else. And when I looked at some of like the movement patterns, how he was getting some of his baskets around the rim, some of the shots he was getting into, some of the drives he was able to ultimately take and make, I wonder, is that just a product of him playing at the D2 level? Is he going to be able to create those same advantages at the D1 level? Second thing I want to talk about would be, and I want your opinion on, you did mention some of, the passing flashes and your breakdown specifically on NoCeilingsNBA.com. I don't feel like he's a pick and roll guy just yet as a secondary option. I think that a lot of when he got into those sets was predetermined getting downhill. Like he kind of had that, I know exactly what I'm going to do here. I just am waiting for the time to get my step on the guy. But then once I actually do get that step and I'm in the teeth of the defense, I'm kind of just going to live with the results a little bit. I didn't necessarily see that type of improvisation in that setting that I saw from him in transition, for example. So I have some concerns there. That's not an immediate concern in terms of minutes next year, but it is something we need to talk about in terms of him getting on an NBA radar. And then the third concern, which you actually did a great job highlighting in your written piece, was some of the defensive stuff. Him, really being upright, not necessarily getting down well in a defensive stance. I think he leaves some stuff on the table in a one-on-one standpoint. It can affect some of his stuff with screen navigation. Again, he's active. He's got really quick hands. But do any of those 3 things in particular jump out to you? And do you think they're going to hinder his transition in a way to the point where he might not necessarily get minutes on the floor for Auburn next year?
Yeah, so I think the one I'm least concerned about is the defense. I think on-ball defense, when you're that athletic, it's like someone can teach you how to do that. And I think he started to figure out how to do that throughout the year. I worry more defensively about the guys that don't know what they're doing, that totally lost off the ball and things like that. And I think he passes that test. I agree on the playmaking consistency. I think the game needs to continue to slow down for him. And I think the fact that even if that assist to turnover ratio is just slightly negative, the fact that it was negative at a lower level is concerning. And I do think his handle tightness needs to improve. And I think that fluidity as a decision maker, as he gets deeper into the paint, needs to come along, like you said, not being so predetermined. I think the biggest issue, like you mentioned, is he just dominating because of his physical gifts, and how is that going to work in the SEC? I think that is 100% the right thing to be concerned about. And it's also kind of why I worry about the shot. Like if the shot isn't legitimate and he's not taking shots and players don't feel like they need to close that hard and they can sort of stunt short or just close out really short on him and not really feel like they need to make a big effort to close out, it's going to inhibit his ability to get downhill. And then the strength comes into play because he's not one of those guys that can just plow into somebody, even if they're sagging on him, and still bully his way to a spot. He's 185 pounds right now. So he's got to get stronger so he can better hold that line when he gets downhill. But I think that is the biggest concern is how is he going to adapt from going from being far and away the best athlete at that entire level of basketball to now being, a great athlete by college basketball standards, but certainly not the absolute best. I think that will be interesting to see. And I think that's going to be the biggest adjustment for him is you're going from creating these advantages purely out of being so far ahead athletically to now you're going to be playing more of an off-ball role. You're going to have to pick your spots in more of a tertiary setting. You're going to have to operate with that fluidity like you talked about. It's a big adjustment. It's why I think a patient approach makes the most sense with him. But I think these tools and some of the flashes are so interesting that I ultimately think that long-term, he's one of the most interesting prospects in this series, even if I have some skepticism about what exactly it looks like this year on the floor at Auburn.
I agree with you in the long term. To pivot back to a more positive approach with Freeman, in the short term, he does have some guys in front of him who will give him some time to develop and work with Coach Pearl and the staff. You've got Kevin Overton transferring in. You've got Abdul Bashir transferring in from a lower level as well. Keyshawn Hall, Drake Cardwell, Philip Jovich. Only one of those guys was on the team last year. Again, a lot of transfers. Kevin Overton coming in from Texas Tech. Abdul Bashir coming in from Casper College. Keyshawn Hall coming in from G-Dub. And then Philip Jovich is an overseas guy. They all have different strengths and weaknesses, and a number of them are experienced and skilled college prospects. But I don't think any one of them in particular necessarily has the blend of skill and athleticism that Freeman does. And so I think if Freeman's jump shot is legitimate, which again, we rattled off a number of positive shooting indicators in his favor. I see exactly what you're talking about with the lower body mechanics on film, but I think his upper body mechanics are actually pretty sound. I like how he squares himself up to the basket on every single shot. He's set off the catch. I think the release is quick and fluid. So if he can iron out some of that lower body stuff, again, maybe get a little more balance into the energy transfer as he moves up through that shot, I think there's enough of a package for him to work with as a set shooter, a catch and shoot guy. We talked about a lot of the transition stuff, the fluidity, some of the ball handling and passing flashes. I think Coach Pearl could maybe look down the bench and see someone like Freeman and say, you know what? We need a little bit more athletic pop in this lineup, someone who can also hit on some of the other things that we need offensively. Can we get him up to speed enough defensively to where we're able to put him on the floor and he's making an instant impact and putting on some highlight reel dunks, some awesome shots to the point where we can't put this guy back on the bench. All of a sudden, he's become a rotational mainstay. And if that happens, Maxwell, I mean, we've seen enough of these stories in the past where all of a sudden, you know, you get enough scouts showing up to the game, you get the right scout showing up to the right game. It only takes one team to start leaking some of those breadcrumbs out there, and all of a sudden he's on an NBA draft radar and we're off to the races. What do you think about his impact in terms of what he could maybe offer the team different to some of those other wings that I outlined?
Yeah, I think, funnily enough, I think like Chaney Johnson last year at Auburn, like kind of played a role that like, if he doesn't play a huge role this year, like that's the role it's going to be. It's going to be coming in off the bench, flying in on the glass, competing on the boards, cutting, getting those put back dunks, and feeding off the passing talent that Auburn has. You mentioned a guy like Keyshawn Hall who can sling it a little bit. Todd Pettiford, Kevin Overton's a good connective passer. And don't sleep on Keyshawn Murphy either, who is like kind of like a bulkier, slower Osa Ighodaro. Like that dude's got some real sauce as a passer. I think he's going to surprise people this year. I think he can feed Freeman. I think he can fill the gaps really well if need be.
When we come back to the Locked On NBA Draft with No Ceilings podcast, we're going to do a quick breakdown on some of Maxwell's other top sleeper wings, including UCLA's Eric Dailey Jr. Stay tuned. All right, our last segment for today's episode of the Locked On NBA Draft with No Ceilings podcast. I'm turning the keys over to Maxwell to share his breakdown of another sleeper wing prospect, Eric Dailey Jr. out of UCLA. Maxwell, why don't you introduce our audience to Dailey Jr. and why he's potentially in for a breakout season out in LA?
Yeah, I think Eric Dailey Jr. just like really quietly got better where it mattered this last season at UCLA. He's always been on radars to a degree. He played for the USA basketball national teams coming up, the U18 AmeriCup in 2022. He played for the FIBA U19 World Cup team in 2023. He's big and he's bulky and he can defend a variety of positions. He's really good at the point of attack, 230 pounds and 6'8". He can sit down, he can slide, he bodies guys up, he forces a ton of dribble pickups. It's just really hard to get penetration against him if he's guarding at you on the perimeter. And then he's so strong that you can't really mismatch on him in the post either. Also, really smart off-ball defender, always communicating, knows where to be, really great at digs. When he helps at the nail, it's a strip every time. That dude's awesome at that, like little micro skill in particular. At a 3.3 steal rate. He's posted a 16.2 defensive rebound rate over the last 2 seasons. And then offensively, he just really knows how to move the ball. Has always had good assist to turnover marks, really comfortable and confident putting the ball on the deck for a player his size. But what's really changed for him over the last year is he's become a much more confident 3-point shooter. He was sort of an if he shoots it guy. And then this past year, shot over 37% from 3 on over 7 attempts per game. He's also really good in the mid-range. He was 12 for 24 in the mid-range, and he's so strong, and he's got touch around the basket, and he can finish effectively inside as well. So there's 3-level scoring, there's defensive upside, there's feel. That's kind of everything you want in a 6'8 dude that's really strong, and I love that kind of player. I think my concern is just sort of the run-jump athleticism. Had really low block rates. He just doesn't get off the floor very well. So sort of for context, the example I used in the article is he had a lower block rate and fewer dunks than Corey Kispert. So when you're kind of talking about that tier of athlete, you usually want him to really be a shooter. Dailey's a good shooter. He's not a great shooter yet. He can be a little ball stopping. Like there's some stuff that has to come along. But I will say, if you look at the UCLA basketball Twitter account, he's looking shredded this year. Like if you look at his upper body, it looks way different. So I'm hoping that we get some real physical development and he can take that little physical leap, because if he keeps knocking down open shots, playing with that level of skill and just defending everybody and being disruptive off the ball, I don't know what else you could want in a modern wing.
So here's the thing about Eric Dailey Jr., right? You can read off a lot of his numbers per synergy in terms of offensive production, and they're going to paint a very good picture, right? 89th percentile in total offense. He was very good to excellent on his top 3 play types that he registered possessions in: spot ups, transition, post ups. 41% on all jump shots, 34.2% on catch and shoot threes, 50% on 40 jumpers off the dribble, and 68% finishing at the rim. Like you said, 3-level scoring, very positive picture. Where I got concerned last year, and I didn't watch like 15 or 20 UCLA games, but I watched a handful and I saw them in person. He didn't necessarily stand out to me on the floor. He was a very passive guy, sort of one of these players, I'm going to prove to you that I can shoot, so I'm going to space the floor from the corners. I'm going to catch it on the wing. And then when he did get the ball, maybe he had an opportunity to take someone off the dribble, some of that like run jump stuff that you talked about, but he settled for a pull-up shot. Now, granted, he made a good number of those, like I just outlined. He was 20 or 40 on pull-up jumpers, but I just want to see him put the ball on the dang deck and just take someone off the bounce and finish at the basket, because we know he's a big, strong dude. We know he can do it. One thing that I want to get your opinion on is this UCLA front court that we have coming in. There's not a lot of like legitimate center size on the roster. Yeah, I think where this team's going to be at their best is going to a lot of small ball lineups with Tyler Bilodeau at the 5, a former Oregon State standout, played for UCLA last year, was a really good pick and pop kind of guy. You have Donovan Dent transferring in, who's one of the best, like spray the ball out guard passers that we have in college basketball. Trent Perry was a top freshman recruit last year. He's expected to take a step forward as a sophomore. There's a lot of interesting perimeter oriented talent that they can put around Dailey. Can he become one of those, bigger wings / forwards who they can involve in different screening actions? Maybe they get him in handoffs. So he can fake that handoff, take a mismatch down low and get to the basket and finish, kind of do some things to get defenses off their toes and not necessarily just, it's Eric Dailey. You're going to find him on the wing. He's spotting up again. He's going to settle for that jumper. Do you think he can maybe mix in a few of those elements, and maybe the coaching staff can get him going in some of those different offensive actions to maybe mix it up and take a little bit of the predictability out of his game?
I think, yes, he can. And I also would say, yes, he has to, because Donovan Dent is a guy who's going to want to get downhill, and the paint's going to be a bit crowded. Bilodeau's already sort of like a back to the basket, sort of old school 4 almost. Like he's one of those guys that's going to make $1 billion overseas, but like sort of an old school play style. Between that and the fact that Donovan Dent's going to want the lane to be open, Dailey's going to have to show that, he can be dynamic in those sort of actions, and also that he's going to need to be a guy who readily shoots those threes when Donovan Dent gets into the restricted area and has 3 guys on him and he sprays it out. He's got to take that 3 and can't settle and put it on the deck and take 2 dribbles and then take something in the mid-range. He's going to have to really clean that up.
100%. Really quick for the listeners, Maxwell,
Yeah.
why don't you just read off the other guys that you covered in No Stone Unturned this week, Wings Part 3. Why don't you just read off some of the names and give listeners a little bit of a tease as to what they can expect when they go read your article?
Totally. Sam Orme, a 6'9", 220-pound redshirt sophomore out of Belmont. Kind of think Jake LaRavia, sort of a big, tall guy who can shoot, really knows where to be defensively, and has a little bit of athleticism to him. Kind of not the name I would associate with him, but the query I used to find Rasheer Fleming for the series was actually the same one I used for Sam Orme, even though they are very different in terms of their play style. Antonio Chol, a 6'9", 210-pound redshirt junior at New Mexico, who came up from Garden City Community College. 6'9", 2.6 stocks per game, 39.7% from three on high volume. 3-and-D as pure as it gets. And then the last one is Will Sidnor out of Manhattan, 6'8", really smooth on-ball operator who really rebounds, has some defensive upside, but just really comfortable putting the ball on the floor. The ball skills and the fact that he shot a good percentage from three on really high volume is interesting. Think somewhere between like Kyle Kuzma and Rui Hachimura is like the long-term vision for him. A guy who just finished his freshman season. He's going to be playing at Manhattan again. He's one for down the road, but he's an interesting prospect.
Awesome stuff, Maxwell. Big shout out to each and every one of you for listening to this episode of the Locked On NBA Draft with No Ceilings podcast. For your second listen, find the Locked On NBA podcast where there is no offseason. Doug, Matt, and Hayes keep you up to date on contract negotiations, rumors, and everything you need to be the most informed NBA fan. Find Locked On NBA on YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, thank you all for listening. I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your week.